we said that they could build fractions, identify unit fractions, change a fraction into whole number and fraction and unit fraction, and then they were able to have multiples of fractions. So that's what we were looking for ultimately for all of our kids. So students that are close to proficient, we identified that their strengths are building fractions, identifying unit fractions, and that they could do multiples. What we noticed is that their missing skills that they were unable to apply the operation sign, change a whole number into a fraction, but that they would just instead just multiply instead of actually going through each step. On our kids that are students that are far,
Yep, go back. Real quick about when you were talking about the multiples, they have to understand that if it's a multiple of a unit fraction, that those are going to be different, basically the counting numbers versus the multiple of any number. So there's a lot of concepts that they have to, we can't just talk about multiples of fractions, we have to break it down to the unit fractions versus
like multiples of 2 8s, like 2 8s, 3 8s, 4 8s, and they weren't looking at multiples of 2.
right?
They just have the idea that it was counting numbers.
Right.
So we have to make sure that we're understanding where the deficiency is for each.
Yes, and you're right, because like today when I started that lesson, I was explaining it's a unit fraction, multiple of a unit fraction, and then just a multiple. So I did break that down as
right. So when they're doing the test, we have to. It's not just understanding the skill; they have to understand what the question is asking.
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of
so
where our kids
another
have
part
their
of that
downfall.
where I felt like close to proficient. Some of those kids were doing instead of 9 times 1/4, they were writing it as 9 and 1/4. And so we talked a lot about, show me what that picture looks like of 9 and 1/4, and show me what a picture of 9 times 1/4 looks like. And so
models helped them with that one.
Right.
Yeah.
Just that little piece makes a huge difference. So kind of when they were doing the unit fractions and not putting their addition sign in between.
Yeah.
Seemed kind of clean.
I get, so are we good to go on? Do you want to go? Okay, sorry, I should have slowed down. Students far to go, we said that their strengths were knowing their vocabulary, and that their interferences were that they were not understanding the relationship of the operations or multiples or fractions, and again, reading the directions, kind of what you were saying, that once we went back to reteach or pull them, they were able to do it, but we were having to break down the directions for them.
Right, and it helps us to be familiar with the test and how the test is asking it, because it's just taking the time to break down and teach it by the standard. It's also forced us to look at the test and make sure that we're not just teaching a math concept, but we're teaching them test-taking strategies, how to break apart to make it simpler. So it's caused me to slow down in my teaching and not just look at this as a math lesson, but there's so many other components. So.
And you're right, because I think now our teaching is more purposeful.
Talking about the reason why, and what does it look like as a model? You know, it's so easy to go with the numbers, but going back, what does this really mean in a picture?
And I don't really think it's necessarily reading the directions, I just don't think they understand what it's asking.
I think there's a strategy. They have to teach them to make it simpler, and that's not. It's simple. It's easy. It's getting rid of all the mumbo jumbo. What are they asking me to do? And I'm trying to give them strategies as to how they can do that. Pull out keywords, or cross out the things that don't matter. Of course, on the computer they can't do that. But if on their paper that they're doing their work, if they could jot down some keywords and then ask themselves.
Right. And actually, they will be able to do it on the computer because they have like highlighters that can highlight those words. That's what they've been practicing.
Right, but not
on here.
Not on this.
Right.
Yeah.
At least.
But I like
maybe on
what we did
personal
in the review that you suggested last chapter, like maybe made a teacher out of like addition words, subtraction words.
That really made a difference.
And we should do that with multiplication, division.
Well, these
Because I have them to see the numbers, and then they just kind of do what they want to do.
Right.
They're not breaking it apart.
Yeah.
But that was good. I used that on the review last time, and I think it helped.
So
Let's finish that part, because I want to talk about how we felt like our group of
I was just going to ask about the
customizing.
customization.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the intervention, we decided that their strengths were interesting. Well, we haven't really decided on their strengths. Right now, we've identified that they're having trouble understanding of operations on whole numbers, multiples of fractions, multi-step directions, changing a product of a whole fraction, and so we need to identify a couple of strengths.
Well, and I think to tie into what Jane was talking about with our customization of learning, whether there was miscommunication or we need to make sure that with our enrichment group,
Yes.
we can't just assume that they have it. We still have to present the information, a shorter lesson, make sure they've got it, and then go on
Yep.
and do. And I think that was just.
That was an
missing piece.
aha for all of us.
It was,
Yeah.
it was our first
Yeah.
time to do it, so it was a
And-
great learning
Yeah.
opportunity for
And I
us
told
all.
my class that too. I said, this whole customization, we tried to meet your needs
Right.
for this unit, and I hope that they saw that. And I said, but we also learned tremendously from
Right.
doing this. And so,
Things that we'll do differently next time.
Because you're right, because I came in expecting them to have the knowledge they needed for this chapter, because we based it on the free test, and then when they came in, it was quick.
But there's
how
also
quick
an-
we identified they weren't.
An element of guessing.
Yeah.
And I did
Yes.
I had my kids go through and write down the ones that they guessed on. So maybe,
Smart.
well, we need to think about how to do that in the future so that we can weigh, they got it right, but is it a guess, or do they actually know? They have to
and you know,
show
there
it.
were a couple of kids in my group that I don't believe were proficient, but because the majority of them were, I was able to really work with them.
Mm.
And I know you had somebody in your class that we moved down
Right.
because they weren't in the right spot.
So just because they were
Using our professional judgment.
skill-based groups based on their needs, you could still break it down even further within each group. You still had the haves and the have-nots, so you had to do some differentiation.
And I think that group could multiply fractions, they just couldn't do it exactly
The way they asked it, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Right, as the
breaking
unit.
apart the question, product,
Of a unit
unit
fraction.
fraction.
Because once we started
That's vocabulary.
identifying that they couldn't do it, we just started pulling them, and it seemed like once we explained the concept once, they were like, oh, well, that's what you're asking.
Right, yeah.
So I think they had it, I just don't think we were using the right vocabulary for them.
So what would we do differently next time?
Well, I like what you did, writing down the questions they guessed on. That's,
Do you think our pretest was enough questions? It was only 12 questions, but we identified.
I
Three
think
skills.
overall, I think they were grouped pretty well.
I do
Yeah.
too.
I mean-
I think the enrichment, we should just hit on the skills and
Right.
then go into their activity.
yes.
Our common assessments were good.
Yeah.
They
I felt
were.
like they were, it
And we
really
had fluid
identified some
groups.
things for us.
Right.
We didn't, we based it on standards, so you might have had one group below basic for the first standard, but your below basic group looked
And
different.
even when we were
for the
moving
second
kids,
standard.
kids had ownership in it, and we talked with kids, we're like, after looking at this, and how do you feel? So we kinda gave that ownership back to kids, and saying, this is what we think, and they moved.
Right.
They were okay with moving.
And they saw different teaching styles too, which is never a
We
bad
need to
thing.
go. So